Welcome to Meeting of the Minds, the weekly show where we interview and discuss people. That was a horrible intro, but we talk about topics on the theist and atheist landscape, and we do it in a civil and respectful way. My name is Christopher Maute, and I'm your host. I am super happy to have as my guest this week one of my best friends. His name is Keith Schneider. How you doing, Keith?
Great. Happy to be here.
Awesome. He's actually visiting me on the East Coast from the West Coast, and we've had an awesome couple of few days gallivanting around the city and eating great food and just having an awesome time in general.
Yep.
But today we're going to bust each other's chops because we have a long and awesome history, specifically dealing with atheist and theist issues. Because we got to know each other when we were in our teenage years, and we're going to get into how we came together and kind of fell apart and then came together again throughout the course of the questions and discussions that we have on the show. But first, I'd like to give everybody who is listening an opportunity to get to know you, Keith, and where you stand in your current worldview now as you perceive it. So let's just start right now and hit the ground running. Um, and Hold on one second. I just want to turn the ringer off on my phone here. And
I
I
already
would
I
like,
already did that.
well, yeah, I wasn't smart. I wasn't smart enough to pull that move. So the first thing I'm going to ask you is, how would you identify yourself, and how would you describe your worldview?
My worldview is, I think, pretty simple, and I think it's part of the advantage of getting to 43 years, and that cliche phrase of you start to realize what you don't know. So realizing what I don't know is almost everything, and what I do know is pretty little. It's sort of fun to enter into this conversation with you, Chris, walking back through the past, 2.5 decades of where we started, the spiritual quests, and then coming in a way full circle with mostly kind of unanswered questions, but with some questions answered along the way. Um, but as we were sidebarring today, I think it's fun to be in a place of the I don't know, and I mostly don't have answers for things. But it's been a pretty interesting journey of trying to find them along the way over the last 25 years of my little personal spiritual quest to come to a place where, to quote Nacho Libre's sidekick, I forget his name, who says, "I believe in
Please do.
science."
Yes. And that seems to be kind of a refreshing and new stance to take in both of our worlds, because there was a
Hmm.
very definite time when both of us thought that we had the answer,
Oh, sure.
in very different ways, both together and apart. So I like the way that you put that down. So in your current worldview, I have some specific questions that I am going to be asking both theists and atheists, and because you kind of have dipped in and out of that, I'm going to ask you a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B. So, do you think that Jesus existed?
I think he probably existed. Um, there was enough stuff written about this guy that he probably walked the earth.
Okay.
I would say I'm in the 75% sure category that there was a dude um, who was Jesus like that walked the earth about the time he did.
Okay. Now, you're qualifying a lot of what you say. So what are
Yeah.
you hiding? What are you trying to qualify? What are you purposely not saying?
Well, what I'm purposely not saying is that the miraculous, otherworldly, uh, unicorn like abilities, magical Jesus probably never happened. Based on my 12, 14 years of research into Christianity and experiencing life as a Christian, seeing zero of the results promised by, New Testament specifically, I just don't think that the miracle Jesus existed. I think that there's a good chance that there was a historical figure named Jesus who came from Nazareth who probably said some similar things to what like me, Joe Average American, believes Jesus said, but I think that those tales have been spun wildly.
Okay. All right. So do you believe in anything supernatural?
No.
Okay. Um, and what is your opinion of the Bible in general?
Oh, that's a great question. I think my opinion of the Bible is equal to my opinion of other books of spirituality, which is um, they may have been born out of people's good intentions or they may have been born out of people's bad intentions. But there seems to be a lot of stuff that Bible Jesus said that was super fantastic, um, that the Christian church in general has no grasp on whatsoever.
Hmm. Okay. And what about, you're talking about New Testament when you talk about magical Jesus. What about the Old Testament?
Well, I think the Old Testament, in my understanding, was a set of promises saying that this guy is going to come. That's kind of the gist of it. And Old Testament was a lot of, my caveman level understanding of it would be that um, God created all this stuff from nowhere. Whether that's to be taken literally or not, who knows? Um, but that Old Testament Bible seems to be a lot of people putting themselves in a pickle, um, doing silly things, all kinds of in what seems to me insane ritualistic activities, uh, just to not get in heap tons more trouble.
Okay. Okay. Um, so I see where you're coming from. I see it very similarly. So what led you to your beliefs,
Oh, I
your
had
current beliefs?
the standard born again experience that was preceded by me having a long road trip with a very good friend of mine. We were traveling from Moab, Utah to Bemidji, Minnesota, where we were moving to. And he had C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity book on tape. And I listened to it and thought that it all made tons of sense. So, being the stereotypical 20-year-old dude, I jumped headlong into something I thought made tons of sense. So
Hmm.
when we landed in Bemidji, Minnesota, joined up with an evangelical church because it seemed kind of fun because they had like a rock band playing there, and that was nothing like the big Lutheran church that I grew up in. So, and then got was taught all the standard 101 level evangelical Christianity stuff that everybody else gets taught in that environment.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember. So here's where
Yeah.
the introductory part kind of ends and the discussion part kind of begins. So for the people that are watching this, I need to let you all know that there came a time when I was in college and I was in my early 20s when Keith went through this stage that he's referring to right now, where I received in the mail a copy of Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a Verdict. And Keith followed that up with a phone call pleading me to repent. Um, he was doing his duty as a good
Mm-hmm.
Christian, as a good born again Christian, to convert, to proselytize. And this freaked me out for several reasons. Not the least of which is Keith is very persuasive when he wants to be, and he wanted to be. And this was a super freak out for me. And the second thing is, he and I were like partners in crime in our journey of seeking what it was all about. We had metaphysical questions, right, that needed to be answered, and we explored everything from what's the word I'm looking for? Crystal awareness to New Age philosophy to the pillars of Taoism to, we read everything. Um, the
Transcendental
journals,
meditation. The
transcendental
list goes on.
meditation, astral
Yeah.
projection, everything like that. And so to hear that he had gone fundamental evangelical Christian and was proselytizing to me on the phone was just like blowing my mind. I was in school to like study jazz, and so like becoming a Christian was the last thing on my mind. So when you called me with that as the topic of conversation, man, it was face melting. I just did not know what to do with that information, man. So so that was deep because I mean, you went into it headstrong, and you went into it with like a great amount of passion, and you actually went on tour with an evangelical. Remember?
I did, which
Hmm.
was actually an incredibly positive experience in retrospect, and it was a great experience then too.
Hmm.
I think that there are some people, and I still have several very close friends who are Christians who I think are in their core the highest quality people I'll meet in my life.
Hmm.
Um, and this guy really was one of them. This is a guy from South Dakota named Lowell Lundstrom, who really is pretty close up there to the Billy Graham level stuff. A lot of people in the Midwest would know who this guy is, but he's an Assemblies of God evangelical preacher who does the John 3:16, which is the standard salvation crusade type of things. And he's been doing this since, oh man, I think since the 50s. And he sings and plays guitar and writes songs. And he's got this huge family, like the Osmond family, that sings and plays music and writes songs. And everybody's uber talented. And when I was with him, it was two tour buses and a semi truck. And I was doing front of house sound, which is a technical position, but you're not
Hmm.
going to get that kind of technical position if you're not a Christian. Um, but this guy was for real. And the really cool thing about him was off the road, he lived in a small house where he raised his kids with his wife, and they were super close to each other on stage and off. And he lived in a small house on his parents' farm in rural South Dakota, lived really, really inexpensively, and there was a lot of money flowing through this organization, but he really, it didn't seem to me, unless he was hiding it extremely well over 4 or 5 decades, he wasn't holding on to it. And so anyway, it was an incredibly positive experience, and his whole thing was going into a city, pulling every church in the city together, and having a big event for a week long at the whatever the biggest local building was.
Hmm. So, and I remember you telling stories about people that you would meet on tour, people that would be on tour with you that had like um, versions. They had like their fifth or 10th version of the Bible because they had over highlighted in too many different colors, so many different sections that they had worn out previous versions of their Bible. They had
Right,
studied it so intently. Could you tell me a little
right.
bit more about that?
Well, one person in particular who was super interesting to me was actually a member of the crew, and I'm going to withhold his name, but
Fine.
he was a guitar player in the group, and he essentially lived on the tour buses even when we were in a town somewhere and we had hotel rooms, and lived on the tour bus when we were off the road and we were back home base. And he never left the tour bus, and he looked a lot like Eddie Munster and had really pale skin and wasn't healthy at all. And this guy was one of those guys who sat there for 12 hours a day listening to preacher tapes. And I remember his favorite was this guy named Benny Hinn, who was uber world famous,
I remember.
definitely
I know
like,
who Benny Hinn is. He's
yeah,
popular for healings, right? He does the
right.
touch. He
Yeah,
touches
miracle
people
healings,
and
and he'll
heals
go
them.
to India, and like 2 million people will show up to one of his events, right? So
Hmm.
he would sit and listen to Benny Hinn tapes and take notes. And this guy had notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of notes and scribblings and collections of tapes. And it's not dissimilar to a movie about a serial killer when they finally find out where the serial killer lives and they go into the dude's apartment and he's just living. It's kind of like this guy living on the tour bus by himself, doesn't wash or change his clothes for weeks on end, with notebooks full of scribbled notes from some mega famous preacher he's never met. You get that
Hmm.
kind of stuff. And that's kind of a fun extreme to look back on.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I mean, so you finished touring with Lundstrom, right?
right.
And you back in Bemidji at this point because somehow you end up on the West Coast.
Well, yeah, what happened was I did 2 years with this guy, and it was one of those jobs where you could do it the rest of your life. It's kind of a cushy job, really, for doing live sound. And so, but I wound up getting I, to the point of engagement, and then to my other very good friend's younger sister,
Hmm.
and then we wound up moving out to the West Coast,
Okay.
where her family was.
Hmm. And so, and eventually, the allure of the Christian worldview kind of became tarnished, and you phased into the perspective you have now. Is that kind of a fair assessment, or
Yeah,
were there
yeah.
any things
You're
that
talking
happened
about
that?
a
Go
10-year
ahead.
process, where um, when I moved to Oregon, I quickly got hooked up with Quakers, which was pretty great. It was a pretty great version of Christianity in my perspective. It was definitely about peacemaking. Quakers kind of have a good reputation around the world as kind of not being the jerks of the Christian world. But a lot of what Quakers were into really resonated with me. The peacemaking at all costs, really looking out for other people, and doing gifts, doing acts of charity without strings attached, without sermons attached, or without calling, like in my case, in our early, what we talked about earlier, calling you up and begging you to become a Christian. There's none of that stuff, and it's more about people, the hope that people will see your life and then get connected to Christianity. But through that evangelical Christian world, no matter how light or heavy it is, there's always the undertone of you're trying to recruit people for your team. And if you make enemies out of your friends along the way, so be it. It's your responsibility ethically to show them the bit of truth, or the big truth that's been revealed to you. So evangelizing is a huge part of Christianity, and sometimes it's kind of subtly masked, and sometimes it's not so subtly masked. But I
Well, I'm
think the
glad that you
Quakers were doing a good job of subtly masking that.
I'm glad that you bring that up because to take the conversation just a little bit away from your and my relationship, one of the things that we deal with here at the New Covenant Group is when dealing with other flavors of Christianity, um, is looking at how honestly they are portraying themselves, and there seems to be this new tactic amongst evangelicals called a presuppositional argument, and it really prevents evangelicals from being honest about their argument. And the fact that you're able to say, hey, when I was in this frame of mind, it was absolutely my goal and ethical responsibility to get people on my team. And this presuppositional argument that's being used now, it would just be so refreshing if they could say that from the get go, so that the people that don't want to be bothered with that could just walk away from the conversation. But instead, they have these weird techniques to get their
Hmm.
hooks in you. So the next thing you know, you're
Hmm.
having this conversation about your worldview that you didn't want to have to begin with.
Right. Well, and I think humans in general, we know when somebody has an agenda. And Chris, you and I are the types of guys who very quickly, not that we recognize that any quicker than somebody else, but we're real quick to say, hey, you know what? I don't care about your agenda.
Mm,
I don't give money to homeless people that beg from me on the street. I don't feel like that's my social responsibility. And I'm sure there are many people that do. But
mm-hmm,
you have somebody that walks up to you on the street and just wants to strike up a conversation. We know that, and we can tell before the first word comes out of somebody's mouth, versus somebody who has a conversational agenda, that they're just warming you up for where they're really taking you. And
true.
evangelical Christians are constantly in that process of reinventing their musical styles, or the marketing materials for their churches, or who the cool speaker of the day is, because he's going to connect with other certain types of people, because things really do come back to that, uh, what you're saying, that presuppositional conversation, that we're going to talk about me helping you come to get to know Jesus, whether you like it or not. And I'm willing to spend years of my life, some people have this perspective, years of my life warming up to that argument. And some people just go and knock on your door and say, I'm here to tell you about Jesus Christ. You ready to go?
Sure.
Let's do this.
Yeah, but the presuppositionalists have a completely different argument there, and you and I can talk about it after the show because it's I don't want to beat a dead horse because
Sure.
it's something that we talk about a lot on the New Covenant group. So maybe you and I can chew the fat about it after the show about the specifics of it because it's mind numbing. But let's just set that aside. But the fact that as a Christian, you felt obligated, ethically obligated, to
Mm-hmm.
get people on your side. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of starting to feel that the new atheist movement or the militant atheists that are out there today have that agenda as well. And I'm having a hard time trying to be a moderate voice in in an environment where there are a lot of shrill voices.
Well,
So,
sure. The shrill voice, as people in music, cuts through, the other
mhm,
tones. And unfortunately, the more absurd something you say is, the more attention you're going to get. And we can see fantastic examples of that on both sides of every kind of argument, from pro-life, pro-choice to whatever, choose your topic. And unfortunately, the voice of moderation, which is oftentimes not even the middle, is oftentimes the voice of a completely different perspective that encompasses both of those perspectives. Really, it's not that fabulous to hear. It's not that exciting.
hmm Yeah, but it's not where the heat is, but I think it's the content that people should be listening to because, I'm always trying to, you know, if I were to be accused of proselytizing, yes, I'm proselytizing the idea that I want to have a civil discourse with people.
Hmm.
And, if that is the good word that I'm spreading, then yeah, accuse me of proselytizing because I want to engage you in conversation. When I troll on Facebook pages, I'm one of the few people that, at least from my own observation, attempts to engage people in conversation. And my posts very frequently get looked over because I'm not slinging mud.
Well, exactly, and that's something that there was a Facebook group that you belong to that you invited me to, and I joined momentarily because I got so tired of that. I got so tired of people having a discussion that starts out with real meat and real substance
Hmm
so quickly turning to your punctuation and your sentence structure really is subpar, therefore the words that you're speaking are untrue or come from an uneducated mind. Well,
hmm
a lack of education doesn't mean somebody doesn't have a fantastic point, and just because somebody doesn't observe the rules of grammar doesn't mean they don't have a fantastic point that may resonate with people. But unfortunately, in the little message board world, or whatever we're calling it these days, um, that kind of stuff quickly digresses to the world of nitpicking and being ridiculous just to one up somebody, and the intellectual one upmanship. What I'm excited about the group that you're belonging to now and the group that we're talking to today is that there seems to be a putting aside of all that stuff, and instead of embarrassing people and one upping people, this whole new idea of let's get together, not just agree
hmm
to disagree, but let me ask you questions about what you believe and
hmm
let you talk it out without trying to make you look stupid and
Yeah.
and cornered. And when people are cornered and the fight instinct kicks in, things get ugly really fast. And so I'm excited that you're finally part of a group where the thrust is civil conversation and respecting one another as human beings enough to let people finish a thought without dissecting the sentence structure of their thought.
Mm. Dare I say, I'm proud of this show.
There you go.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you very much for noticing. I think that the New Covenant group is a blessing. I'll leave it at that. And I'm super happy and proud to be, a contributing member to it. So it's we have about 15 minutes, and I would like to start busting your chops with some of these lightning round questions that I have for you. And, you can be as pithy or go into as much detail as you want about them. Um, they're somewhat standardized, but I'm also kind of trying to hone them down into a nice, concise list. I do before I get into some of these questions, I do want to give some credit and some shout outs to some people that helped me come up with these questions. Um, because I'm certainly not smart enough to come up with all of these questions. I've been culling these questions from a group of people that I interact with on the YouTube world, on the interwebs, and through Google Plus Hangouts. And I just wanted to give a couple shout outs to some people specifically. FSX23 is one of the gentlemen that I'm working with, as well as 13 Heathens, as well as Clinton Graham. So I just wanted to say that out loud, and so that they don't feel slighted by the fact that I'm using some of their questions. That being said, get
Okay.
ready and fasten your seatbelt, Schneid.
All right.
So let's start with something super basic. Would the world be better off without theists?
Well, probably not for
Bring it.
atheists because there'd be nobody to argue with.
But wouldn't the world just be, from the atheist's perspective, wouldn't the world just be better with just atheists?
Well, I think that question is about as worthwhile as would the world be better off without cheese?
Oh, that would be a horrible world.
For you, but for some people, cheese is a temptation and they're lactose intolerant. So cheese is
Hmm.
horrible. But for me, I enjoy cheese tremendously. I don't
Okay,
think so.
so
I'm going to choose no. A.
okay, now explain why, please. Why wouldn't the
Because I
world be
think that
better off without
for
theists?
I think that theism for some people is a really great way to get through the day. I
Okay.
mean, I had a friend who was pretty much his religion was AA, and that helped him get through the day. I think for some people that's really works, but I think theism, just like cheese, if used in overabundance or funneled towards and used in a greedy way, or in a hey, I want you to join my cheese team because cheddar cheese is way better than Limburger. Now you're
Yeah, but
causing
people now
problems.
you now you're getting crazy because people don't talk about cheese the way that people talk about religion. People don't proselytize about cheese. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you eat too much cheese,
Some
you're
people
just hurting
don't.
yourself.
Right. I do eat cheese and I enjoy it tremendously.
And we got some delicious cheese. Um, so I had a viewer comment that I'd like to read to you and see what you have to say about this. They said that they're busting my chops essentially. They're saying that's like saying, would the world be better off without Trekkies? Vigilante Trekkies, go away. Fun Trekkies, love them.
Well, yeah,
So,
and it's true. I mean, once again, one's belief in whether it be unicorns or Homer Simpson's Jeebus or that the moon is made of green cheese, that belief can be relatively harmless when kept personal.
mhm.
Okay.
but
And it can
but
be
one,
relatively harmless when you go about telling other people about it in a fun way. Hey, I just decided that the moon is made out of green cheese. What do you think
okay,
about that? But the minute we're going to other continents and forcing people to believe that the moon is in fact made out of green cheese, and if you don't believe this, then we're going to withhold the care and aid that we're able to give you. Now we start causing problems.
okay. So anything that doesn't become dogmatic is cool with you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, all right, I'll buy that for $1. Um, Here's a question for you. So you're essentially towing the atheist line nowadays, and you don't believe in the supernatural. Would that be a fair assessment?
That is true.
Okay. What evidence would disprove your worldview?
What evidence would disprove my worldview? Something
Yes.
supernatural happening.
Give a specific example. Like what kind of supernatural thing? Like would you need to be holding a glass of water that you poured from the tap and somebody else would have to turn that into wine before your eyes? Something like that? Or something more
But wine does
miraculous?
come from water.
Oh, I hear you. Okay, so like give me an example.
No, I'm just being silly. But
No.
okay. So yeah, let's choose a random. Let's say once again, Homer Simpson Jeebus comes floating down from the sky with a horde of 10 million unicorns, and the prophecy of Jeebus is fulfilled, and magical stuff starts happening. The unicorn's horns shoot out magical rays, and magical things happen. it's got there seems to be, this really great apologetic that I heard over and over again when I was involved in Christianity is God only gives you as much miracle as you need. Well, like, apparently I must have needed none, because I saw nothing occur that couldn't have occurred naturally. In other words, people who declare that their lives were changed. I used to be a gangster, and I was in prison, and I was smoking meth all the time, and I was beating up on baby kittens and all that kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
I became a Christian, and now I'm a super nice guy. Well, people suddenly decide, and can change their behavior all the time. It happens all the time. But we
Hmm.
attribute this magic to Jesus. Oh, thank you, Jesus, for helping me throw the winning touchdown pass in the Super Bowl. I mean,
Hmm.
come on, it just becomes absurd. And so, there was a great story about this mural in Mexico that exposed itself over time, and it was on the side of a building, and people thought that there was a picture of Jesus coming through the side of this building. This was like in the 80s, and basically what it was is it was a Willie Nelson tour poster from like 15 years before that had been whitewashed over, but people were believing it was Jesus. Well, and Willie Nelson, in my opinion, is pretty awesome. So I
Hmm.
can see why they would want Willie Nelson to be Jesus.
Sure.
But that said, where are these supposed miracles that happen, and people that are claiming their life changed? Well, sheer force of will does all kinds of wonderful things that seem magic. Through sheer
Yes.
force of will, a 90-pound mom can pick up a car that's on top of their child that's crushing it. You know,
Hmm.
the world is amazing. Science has given us all kinds of wonderful insights as to why that supposed miracle can happen. It's called adrenaline.
Hmm.
So anyway, yeah, I would, if my mind would absolutely be changed if some incredible miracle happened right before it, but I'm not expecting that to happen, because in the 12 years of research I did, and I tried really hard looking for that stuff and hung out with those people, and there
Hmm.
seems to be zero physical evidence. Just like the only thing we have on the Loch Ness monster is that blurry picture of Nessie, which may be super real, but that's just not quite enough evidence for me.
Gotcha. All right. So, what question would you most want to be asked by a theist?
What question would I most like to be asked by a theist?
Sure.
Will you build a house for me, and can I pay you 3 times your normal rate?
And what would the answer to that be?
Yeah, yes, I think so.
That is the most pragmatic question, answer to that question I've ever heard. So I'm almost
I would
afraid to
love to
ask
have that
this.
question asked.
What question would you least want to be asked by a theist?
Oh God. Along those same lines,
Now, keep in mind, children are watching this.
will you keep in mind children are asked. What question would I least like to be asked by theists? Um, I think I've heard them all. They're just so tired. I mean, if it's a theist based question, you
Hmm.
know, what if you're wrong? I mean, come on. What if you're wrong? So, what if I'm wrong? I guess I'm wrong then. I'm wrong about most things. There are very few things I'm right about. I'm right about like how awesome my kids are. I'm right about how great Chris is. I'm right about how fantastic a lady Julie is. Besides that, I'm mostly not right. I mean, I've been in construction for like a decade and a half, and I'm still figuring out how little I know about that. And that's not really difficult stuff to know a lot about.
Okay. So here's a question for you, and this is kind of long, so I need you to kind of bear with me a little bit.
Okay.
Let's say you get to pick, in your opinion, the smartest or wisest person as a representative of humanity to answer this question: does God exist? What field of study should that person be predominantly known for? So let's say you get to
Uh,
pick the smartest or wisest person that you can come up with as a representative of humanity to answer the question, does God exist? What field of study should that person be predominantly known for?
I want to say rhinoplasty, but I feel like that might be the wrong answer.
Well,
Uh,
I mean,
I
I
think
study
that
smell, so
I think that funkology would be a good field of study.
Okay. So you're
Not that
talking.
it's you, but I know that there's some really geniuses in that field. Um, I have a friend who's a Quaker pastor who's a fantastic human being that I would love to be for him to be the guy that answers that question, because I feel like it's going to be pretty good. And if you could get him to really speak honestly, I think it would be a lot of fun.
Hmm. Okay. Well, I think that we had talked about this. I hope that when you do get back to the West Coast, that you have an opportunity to talk to him, and you're going to be able to put the two of us in
Yeah.
touch with each other, because he sounds like a great person to talk
Oh,
to.
I think you guys will have a lot of fun.
I'm totally looking forward to that. So here's a question for you. What is the best argument that you've heard against your position?
The best argument I've heard against my position,
Yes.
I, I, I mean, this sounds really dismissive, but the arguments against my position, I've argued them, and they all really fall short. I mean, the best arguments came from my own mouth. Those are the ones I can remember. Like, what if you're wrong? You know, this stuff predates you. There's a lot of people that are way smarter. I mean, most people are way smarter than me, and so there's a lot of people that are way smarter than you that believe that you're wrong. That's kind of a fun slash insulting one. That takes your, can take for some people their will to explore things on their own away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So, those are pretty much the questions that I'm interested in asking you. I'm just curious to know, do you have some questions for me? Because we do have a little bit of time left, and so we can totally freeform the rest of these last 5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah, good. Okay. So here's my question: Is we all have these markers on us, kind of internally, for that represent our spiritual quest. And you've got your markers, you've got some tattoos that you put on yourself externally, starting way back in the day. There was a bass clef, and there's a Gandalf tattoo. Chris has some really like interesting tattoos that have morphed over time. And I think that people would be super interested for you to tell people about your right and left shoulder tattoo, what they are, and what the heck you were thinking when you put them on you.
So let's see. I got this right here. I don't know if y'all can see this. So this is going to be super fun and just out of nowhere, right? So you
Yeah.
got the bass clef. I got that when I was 18. When I was 18 years old on Hollywood Boulevard. When I was 17, I moved to Hollywood, California, much to the chagrin of my family. And I got myself a nice big tattoo with this triangle and circle behind it and this little spade right here. Don't ask me why I got the circle or the triangle or the spade. I just thought they were designed kind of cool. And in the very center of the bass clef right there is a little yin yang sign, just as a tip of the hat to the new age philosophies I was reading at the time. And then I moved to San Diego about 6 months after that, and I got this sun and bubbles all around it. And then a bunch of years later, I got the red sun on the outside of it, just as decoration. And then we got the wizard. So that's Gandalf. And I originally got Gandalf in the middle part of the tribal design done as a birthday present from my parents when I was 19 years old for my 19th birthday. And then I got the moon to offset the sun that was on my other shoulder. And then I got this more tribal stuff around the outside of the pre-existing tribal stuff that I had colored in and faded down to just an outline. So that's pretty much it. And I'm looking to get more done. And even though I'm 42, I know I'm getting a little old for this stuff, but I would like to get a little bit more done on one of the arms so that it's a full sleeve. But I know that my mom's probably watching right now, going, "Oh, Maron." So those
I,
are my
I got another one
tattoos.
for you, Chris.
Go ahead.
So here's a fun one, because you and I have gone through what I have, the term that I have coined, and I'm sure somebody else beat me to the punch on this, but I like to call it the spiritual salad bar, where you just experience it all, and then you go through a little bit of process of picking and choosing, and you try this and you try that, you try the other thing, and then you maybe go back for a second helping of a little bit of this or that. But out of all of the stuff that you've experienced in the realm of your spiritual quest, going back specifically to late teens through the 20s.
Hmm.
If there was anyone that was the one, like, if there was one that you came across that this actually is working, and this is actually the one, and this is where the miracles are occurring, and this is where the supernatural is kicking in, which one do you think would have been the most fun?
When we were practicing lucid dreaming, do you remember
Yeah,
that?
yeah, uh-huh.
That was really effective for me. Lucid dreaming and the meditation practice of rotating chakras. Is that answering your question, or do you want something like really specific, like Taoism, Buddhism,
Well,
or
no, I mean that's another flavor of that stuff. You don't have to go so mainstream. But yeah, I remember you were doing the chakra rotation, and that just I spent about 3 minutes looking into that, and that did nothing for me. So what specifically about that was working for you at the time, or was so enchanting, perhaps? Because I think a lot of
yeah,
times
I
when we
was
get pulled
charmed by
into
it.
theism, there's something just enchanting about it.
Hmm. You know what? I think the reason why I even chose the chakra rotation meditation trick is because it still resonates with me to this day. And the reason why it resonates with me is because I don't really believe that there are chakras, but I believe that there are. I believe that thinking about chakras is a wonderful mental technique that you can use to practice focusing. So you pretend that there is a red chakra at the base of your spine that you're rotating, and then you focus on that, and you inhale red air and you exhale red air, and you rotate this chakra, and then you focus your energy on the orange chakra that's above that, and just it's a thought experiment in laser sharp focus. And when you focus your energy that long, your mental energy, you feel differently after doing it for 15 or 20 minutes, genuinely. Now, the
Sure.
lucid dreaming, that was awesome because you and I used to have these crazy ideas where we'd be like, all right, so tonight try to have a dream where you're jamming with Steve Vai. And for those of you who don't know, Steve Vai is a very popular shredding awesome guitar player that was super popular back when we were kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, we used to write these things in a journal, and then we would dream, we would go to sleep with this idea, hoping that we would have a dream about it. And we would try to like wake up in our dreams, and then we would have dream journals. And, that was super fun for me because the practice of
Yeah.
writing down my dreams was great.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So if I could revisit that, if I had time to do that all over again, I would love to
Yeah.
incorporate that back into my world.
Yeah.
What about you? What about I only have about a minute or two left, but if you could sum it up, what of the things we explored did you like most, resonated most with you?
Well, I think getting into some of the kooky supernatural stuff was really fun. I remember spending hours on my couch in my apartment in Lancaster trying to make myself levitate, and just hoping that when you open your eyes, you're going to be 2 feet above the couch, because that would have been fantastic. Because I think a lot of my search, especially early on, is when you hit your late teens, your early 20s, you start to realize you're not the sole force that rules the universe, and you start
Hmm.
to want to, at least I did, believe in something magical and powerful and want to be part of that. And so for me, a lot of it was, why I spent so much time in Zen Buddhism, is that seems super magical. And, the Zen Buddhist monks who, from what I had read and learned, who could sit underneath an icy waterfall for 24 hours and just be there and be just as happy as they were eating a bowl of Haagen-Dazs, dark chocolate, peanut butter ice cream. So to me, like, the supernatural stuff that seemed to be occurring to some people, that there seems to be zero evidence of, and nobody ever seems to catch themselves on tape levitating, just like Nessie the Loch Ness Monster still hasn't been caught on tape. But that would
Hmm.
have been super fun had we actually had superhero powers.
That would have been cool. All right.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of superhero powers, we're just gonna leave it at that. For those of you that are watching, I'm gonna be recording a post-show wrap-up. That's going to be on my YouTube channel, and my YouTube channel can be found at youtube.com/user/MauteMan, and MauteMan is spelled Mauteman. I'm gonna do my post-show with my buddy Keith. Right now, Keith is at my house. I'm at a neighbor's house so that we can get the best bandwidth for this conversation. Um, and when this show gets uploaded to the New Covenant Group's YouTube page, I will mirror it on my page as well. I'd like to thank Keith for spending so much time discussing such great things and rollicking in our past for the past 45, 50 minutes. And we will see you all next week. Thank you very much.